You can look at what isn't working. You can look at what thing that has been staying alive that has overstayed its welcome.
Yeah.
And say, you know what? I'm finished with that.
Yeah.
I am finished with that thing. That is completed. That is done. And we can start anew. We can start from a new place.
Mm-hmm.
That is always open to us.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
And this is the end, Evan. Or is it just the beginning?
Oh, no.
Yeah, we don't know. So, Law of completion. Law of completion.
The law of completion. And as far as we understand, the law of completion is...
The law of the middle? I mean, here's the thing. We don't know how to necessarily define this because it's an interesting idea, completion. Because it kind of brings up the idea of an ending and a beginning and something being over.
Yeah.
But like nothing's really over. We're always in the middle. But there is a value to this law about having a sense of completion.
Yes.
And having, in some ways, a bit of an ending because new beginnings are important, as we talked about in our very first law that we presented.
Yes, man. We're just really jumping, firing on all cylinders coming into this one.
Yeah.
So completion as well. I mean, this is our last law really to share with you. Not that because there is tons. Does that make sense? Is that grammatically correct? I don't know. There's a lot more. There's a lot more to get into with all of the laws that we've explored up to this point. But this one is our last one as we understand for now. Who knows? We might stumble upon another one at some point in time. But as for now, this is where we're at, and this was the last one. We kind of, I think, left it intentionally.
Yeah,
we
started with the law of the beginning, or law of beginnings, and then we were kind of like, well, let's kind of hold off on the completion thing, and maybe we can save that for the end. Now, I think there may be other laws that get presented beyond this point. But what we've done now is we've laid out 21 laws, including this one.
I don't think it's actually 21 laws, because our first 3 episodes, we didn't really talk about any particular laws. So.
Yes, Evan, but this is episode 24.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. It is. That's right. I knew that.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
So we've done 21 laws.
We've done 21.
Yeah. The first 3 episodes, if you haven't listened to them, they were setting up what this podcast was really going to be. And we were basically prepping you for the next 21 laws, which we just presented, and in many ways how to apply them to this journey, your way, your path that you're on. And the law of completion is an interesting one, I think. And I'm just going to start with this idea that when we go on a journey in our life, we have in our mind an end point. We have a completion point. But that's not necessarily the end. It's just that we have an idea of where we're trying to get to. But once we get there and we actually make that happen, a new beginning starts. And the journey continues, but we experience, I would like to say, either a chapter of the journey or a book of the journey, and then we're on to the next book or the next chapter of our journey. And here's the thing that I think what makes this law so important. Recognizing the law of completion allows you to pivot, allows you to change and see that you're in something new. Because once one thing is kind of done, sometimes you can get stuck in trying to do it the same way you've always done it. I know this was for me. Like, my 20s have been much different than my 30s. And in my 20s, it was very much about, and I think this was important. Actually, I've come to peace with that. A lot of my 20s were about achievement and success and, almost it was really defined around a lot of figuring out how I relate to other people, what people think of me, making my parents proud, stuff like that. Near the end of my 20s, I think things shifted. where it became much less about trying to please others and trying to get approval and get love, whereas it became more about this deeper search for meaning, this kind of self-reflection. A lot of life changes occurred. And I think what happened was like that chapter of my life kind of was completed. I made my show. I completed my big thing that I was trying to do. And it wasn't quite what I thought it would be, but it was a great experience. I'm glad I did it. And then I began on a new thing. But here's where I kind of got caught up. I kept trying to go back to the old story for answers, and they don't answer the questions of today.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
And that's keeping something going that is past its prime. It's past its due date.
Yeah.
And that's when things start to get a little bit rotten.
Right.
It's like, no, it's done. Because that's the things that there are things in our lives that if we aren't actively engaged with it and paying attention to it, they will complete. They will just become complete on their own. They will just end on their own. But if we're still hanging on to it, we run into a lot of problems that way. One thing, parallel, I want to bring this into is within different artistic modalities in and of itself. And some of my own experiences, like especially with something perhaps like screenwriting, which is getting really precious about something, and of course, like when you put yourself out there, you set out to create something, you put a lot of heart into it, ideally. You want to put as much of your heart into what you do in your life as possible. And by getting too precious about things, sometimes I would be worried about completing something, coming to that completion point. And so it would take me a really long time to finish some of these projects that I'd started. And it comes from this idea or this fear that I had that I'm not going to have another good idea. I'm not going to have another idea for a script that's as good as this, which is complete nonsense, right? And eventually you hit a point where sometimes the law of completion will work and you have a bunch of uncompleted things. And that in itself, it becomes kind of your completion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like what's uncompleted becomes the completion. And so you have a lot of stuff that's never actually completely finished or come into fruition, but it's a lack of engagement that has kind of ended the life of this thing.
That's a great way to bring this in, the lack of engagement. I think there is a time where we're interested in something and then our interests move on. And, it's time for us to look for a new thing that we might actually be more engaged in and more interested in. I think the law of completion is kind of, in some ways, also the law of follow-through. It's where you push yourself to make sure that something gets done simply so that you can move on from it. I think so there's this book I read, when I went through a bit of it, for people who don't know, I went through a bit of a depression through a period of my life. It was like, and sometimes it'll sneak up every now and then, these thoughts of these ideas. And, I think my opinion about depression is that I think depression is one of those things where we as a society don't fully understand it. But when we begin to understand what creates a depression in us, that we start to see depression as more of nothing's wrong in the sense that nothing's wrong with you. But what's wrong is that in your own sense of self, you feel something's wrong. And in many ways, you don't know what to do about it and you feel powerless over it and such. So anyway, I was reading this book. I picked up this book from a used bookstore at a certain point, and it was a real game changer for me. It's by Jack Canfield, and it's called The Success Principles. And in one of his principles, he says, it's like basically completion. You need to complete. And he says people have these long lists of stuff that are incomplete, and that's what weighs on them. They just feel like they have all this stuff. And he said one of his exercises, and this truly does work. He said, just take your list of stuff, pick the most important things, and start completing them. Just start complete. It'll feel so good.
Right.
And this is a great way to climb out of a depression. It could be as simple as, I got to do the dishes. You did the dishes. It's complete. That complete feeling feels great. Mm-hmm. And I heard another guy, Kerbin Ray, I think is his name, something like that. But he said, he was talking and he was saying, how do you build confidence? And when you're depressed, if anyone's been there, even if you only had it for a day or an afternoon, depression kind of also feels like there's no confidence because you don't feel powerful. You don't feel like you can do anything. And you feel powerless over your world. That's why you feel depressed in a lot of ways. There's many other things I can get into. I'm not going to get into the whole gamut today, but powerlessness is a big part of it. The law of completion is actually showing you that you actually are powerful. And Kerbin Ray was pointing out, he's like, you need to give people tasks, or they need to give themselves tasks that they're able to actually complete and achieve. Because small ones. Because once they start completing small things, they'll believe they can complete bigger things. To me, the law of completion is like it's stacked. You do something small, you complete something small, you start to believe you can complete something bigger, and then bigger, and then bigger, and then eventually you get confidence because you go, I can complete a really big thing. And people go, how could you do that? It's like, because I did many, many small little completions. But you have to have a point where you say, this is done, and I'm moving on.
Yes.
And also, I'm going to say one other point, because you brought up the engagement thing. If something is no longer of interest to you and you don't care, it's okay to throw it out and be like, I'm done. I'm crossing off the list. It's no more in my life. And that's important too, because you don't need to go complete stuff you don't care about and doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, because we can often get stuff. I've been there where there's a project, and the only reason, and it's like carrying these bags around with you of these uncompleted things, and saying like, oh, I never finished it, and then realizing, well, I really don't care about this anymore.
Yeah.
The only reason I care about it is because it's like incomplete, and I have a sense of guilt around that. And it's completely unnecessary, where I just go, you know what? You don't care about it, then why are you doing it? Let it go. Sometimes wherever you got it to, that was all it was ever supposed to be. Especially in our, like, for me, this is stuff like working on a story idea or a script idea. And it got to a point, and I just lost interest at a certain thing and went, I have no desire to actually finish this out. But that's still me going, all right, it's complete. Whatever it was supposed to be, I was supposed to get out of this, I got out of it as maybe just a creative exercise.
Yes, totally.
But to try and go ahead with it, I mean, you can if you want. I mean, there might be some reward you get out of that, but there are circumstances where it's just best to let these things go. And that's could be arguably another way of wording this law, which is, this is the law of letting go at times as well.
It reminds me of that saying, like, it's not over till it's over. Who decides when it's over? You do. I do. We decide when it's over. This is the beauty of the law of completion. Law of completion is like, I have the power to decide when this is the end. And when we're done. I can either discard it, I can delegate it, or I can do it. You really have three options when it comes to the law of completion. Either do it and complete it, delegate it to someone else, and if you don't care, discard it. Those are really that's all you can really do. And the law of completion, basically, I think it takes those three things and just says, like, you decide when the end is. Because we're never really, this is the kind of, I think, the thing that we get caught in life. We are never really at the end of anything. We don't even know if when we die, that's the end. I mean, we might believe it is, but we don't know. So we don't know the ending, so we have to literally in our minds decide when the end is. So, like, even when you're writing a script, you could go on with the script and keep telling the story and keep telling the story and keep telling the story. You have to decide at a certain point, when's this going to end? Like, what's going to be the point in which we finish this?
Or you can, in another, for script writing in particular, you could continue to go back over and over and over it, editing and editing and editing and editing, and there can never be any end to it.
Right.
And it would just constantly be this thing. Eventually there's a point where you just got to go, okay, it's good enough.
Yeah.
Or it's whatever it's going to be. And the reason why this is so important is because completion opens up it opens up the next chapter for us. We have to finish the chapter before we can move on to the next one.
Yes.
That's just the way that it goes. And sometimes we want to refuse, we want to deny that something is done, that something is completed. And again, sometimes we're very much afraid of bringing something to completion because we're worried about what's out there or what's the alternative. We fear losing what we know. That was something that I've heard recently. We don't fear the unknown, we fear losing what we know. And sometimes completion brings up these things where it's like, well, this is what I know, and I've gotten comfortable with that. So there is a very interesting process that occurs with completion, because it is in a kind of way a death of sorts.
Yeah.
You know, it's a letting go, it's a death, it's saying goodbye in some ways.
You know, okay, since you brought up the death thing, this has been a big topic of interest to me of late, because death teaches so much about life.
Yes.
Not because I'm being morbid or whatever, but like I've been realizing a lot at this chapter in my life is like, well, at some point my life is probably going to end. I mean, I'm going to have no more time left to do as I do. And having this recognition, like I remember my 20s, like I didn't think about death. Like that was like, for me, that was so far from my mind. I mean, my life, as far as I was concerned, was just going to be going on forever. That would be something I'd worry about one day, or concern myself, I should say, with one day. But you know, like,
and then one day you do.
Yeah, and then one day you do.
Yourself with it.
You know, and I think in our society, in Western culture, we've learned to look at death as this like super sad thing of loss and, you know, mourning and all of that. And I think there is a valuable part of that, but there's also this part of death which I look at as kind of a celebration. And this is weird to some people. I mean, they're not ready to accept this, but like a celebration to the life that the person lived. I mean, the only thing to be sad about would be, you know, I think for the person is that if they lived their whole life and never actually got to live the life they wanted to live. I mean, that's sad. That's heartbreaking to me. You know, I get the fact that, you know, we can mourn somebody when they die because we miss them and we want them to be in our lives and we want to continue to share our lives with them. You know, that for sure, I feel that's just an expression of love, though. You know, so like, let's bring this into the law of completion. The death of something, you can still love it even though it's gone. It doesn't have to be there in your life anymore, because when someone passes away in your life, they actually, in some ways, they create an opening for something new to come in. And just because you have an opening and you fill that opening maybe with someone else or some new activity or some new thing, doesn't mean that the love you had for them is somehow diminished or gone. And I think back to my 20s, and there's things I love about my 20s. I love the house parties we had, and where we bring people together, and we were playing Guitar Hero, and you know, and the all-nighters, and you know, the passion we had for acting, and how we all believed we were going to be famous superstars, and this kind of, it has this euphoric kind of thing to it. And you know, some people went off and they did shows, and that's really cool and great. You know, I went off, I made my show, I had a wonderful time doing it, and now that's kind of done. You know, and now I'm in this new chapter in my life where it's like, I don't know. I mean, I don't really care so much about being some big movie star anymore. And I don't really care about making some big grand show, at least not at this chapter and this point in my life. It may change, it may evolve into something. But that's been a really weird thing for me, because it's like, but wait a minute. you're a filmmaker. You're the guy who does this. You're you throw the parties, you bring the people, like, and maybe now it's like, well, that's not the life I want to live right now. But I still love the guy that lived that life, even though I don't live like him anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And like, this is a literal life completion where that guy in his 20s completed a certain kind of thing,
mm-hmm.
and it's done. There's no more to do. And sometimes I get caught because I try to go back and I try to be like, oh, well, maybe but I'm not a 20-year-old anymore. I'm just not.
Yeah.
I don't like I'm wiser. I'm more aware. I'm more empathetic, more compassionate. When I was in my 20s, I was kind of more egotistical, maybe more self-involved. But in my 20s, that worked for me. Now it doesn't make sense for me anymore. And I think the law of completion is recognizing that when you have a transition or a change in life, that kind of the old person you were died.
Mm-hmm.
And you can still love the person you were, but embrace the person you are. That's like the lesson I'm learning.
And that person is still a part of you.
Yeah.
And that all of these experiences are still a part of you. The thing is when we hang on to them, we lose out to what's here now. And this is kind of
the law of presence.
The law of presence is how it's related to presence.
And the law of seasons.
And seasons.
Because seasons end too.
Yes. And every season brings with it something new.
Yeah.
That's vitally important. There's a relationship to all of it. Completion is related to beginning.
Totally.
As we discussed earlier on. So this is one of these things that there are a lot of things we kind of dread about some of the things around this law. But it is so vital and so necessary to us living, to us creating, to us playing and growing, and all of these things. All of these really wonderful things that completion is associated with. Or letting go. Or endings. Law of endings. However you want to slice it.
Well, I think when we start looking at the law of completion or the law of ending, if we want to call it that temporarily, if we started in seeing an ending as a new beginning, if we started to see it as a blank, I love how you said this earlier before we started this conversation. You said a blank canvas. Because just because I have a blank canvas doesn't mean I haven't done the art I've done before as an artist.
Yes.
But I don't need to bring that art into this canvas. This is a new canvas, but I'm still the artist. And even if I'm done another painting, it doesn't mean that just because I'm starting a brand new painting, that the last painting I did does somehow not matter anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It simply means that I'm done working on that last painting, and now I'm on to this painting or whatever, right? And I'm still the painter. I think like the law of completion is kind of you recognizing that you are still here even though things end and things begin. And you get to see that endings and beginnings help you evolve you. Mm-hmm. But I think we get caught up a lot of the time, and I know I have, like when you're making a film, it's the same as making a painting or something. You're making this piece of art, and you get so involved in that piece of art, you think that art is you. But that's just an expression of you. Mm-hmm. It's a glimmer of you. It's like almost nothing. It's like
it's a piece, but it's not. Yeah. It's not the entirety of who you are.
Yeah. Even if you spent your whole life doing one piece of art, that still isn't you.
Yes.
And that's, I think, an artist needs to wrap their head around. And I think whether you're an artist or not, you could spend your whole life like building a family. And that's an art. There's people who are masterful at building families or building teams. Mm-hmm. There's an art in that, in my opinion. But that still is not you. That's still just an expression of the infiniteness of you.
Yes.
And the law of completion, I think, is about you recognizing that there's like a piece of you that can kind of almost stand still, and then you can move on from it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, I think the law of completion lets you let that thing be so you can begin again.
Yeah.
You know?
And the thing is, and again, it's not that this, and we discussed this a little bit before we started, was that this whole, even the notion of completion, it's almost paradoxical. It's almost illusory because there really nothing ever remains as just done. You know, like with every, when, as they say, with every door that closes, a new door opens. Right? This is kind of the same thing. But if we refuse to close that door, or accept that the door is closed, if that door has been closed sometimes on us, and we're standing there beating on the door saying to open, that door's not opening. It's not there anymore. But there is a new door. There is a new door, a new adventure, a new thing to discover within the completion. That's the gift of completion. That's actually a gift if we can learn to see it that way.
It is. It really is a gift. You know, I think one of the hardest things for an animal, a human being, really any living creature, is change. It's one of the most challenging things. If you think about it, I mean, it makes perfect sense, because the moment change happens in our life, we immediately have to adapt. We have to evolve. We have to figure out how to match whatever new environment, new thing, new position, new way that we're in.
Yeah.
But I think that's what makes life kind of fun and interesting. And like the law of completion in some ways is kind of like, okay, well, it's time to adapt. The way you were is kind of done, and now the way you need to be is new. And I think where people sometimes get stuck, and I know I've done this myself, I'm certain of it, is where we refuse to accept that things have changed. And I think like change is kind of in many ways the law of completion, because like change is basically like that is done and this is happening now. Yes. Like you do Meisner, right? You're in a moment in Meisner, you're doing repeat, right? And then all of a sudden the moment changes. And if you don't change with it, the game stumbles. You know what I mean? And it's like that is completion. We've completed that moment.
Yeah.
You know?
I recently just ran a workshop, and you bring up one of the lots of interesting things happen. But there was this one moment, and it is very much an improvisation. And this genuine moment came out where one of the students kind of broke down. They were crying, and the other student was up there with them, and very much just like connected with them, and it was very beautiful as they kind of worked this scene out. But the person who was kind of consoling them kind of stayed there. They just kind of stayed in that space of like, I'm consoling you, I'm taking care of you, I'm, I just want to help you. And within that, they were missing out on all kinds of things that were going on. That yes. They were hanging on to this moment
because it was so beautiful.
Because it was so beautiful. Perfect. They're like, oh my God, like we're
and they want it to just continue.
And they just want it to continue on forever. And I'm like, I know, it's so great, but did you see this thing that they were doing? Because there was like, I was observing all of this other stuff that was going on. That all this other beautiful human behavior that had occurred after this initial thing had happened. And so it's so important to stay with, well, what's happening right now? What's happening right now? That thing is done. That moment is done. But now there's another moment, another really beautiful moment. And if you don't move with it, and you don't always know what's coming around that corner. But the thing is that in this particular example, no one knew that this emotional kind of breakdown was going to occur. That wasn't planned. It's just because it's an improvised scene of sorts, and nobody knew that was going to happen. But the only way that happened was because they were moment to moment with each other. They were letting everything kind of come and go, just come and go, come and go, come and go. It was going like that until this thing happened, and then it was just like not letting it go. Mm-hmm. They were just saying, it's like, oh wow, this is happening. Let's just stay here. Let's just stay here. Let's just stay here. Let's just stay here.
I think that's a struggle we all face. Is we find a moment that just is so beautiful. We just love it. It's working so well, and that's one of those things is like we never want it to end. We just want it to be like this forever. I remember I was down, it's a few summers ago, I was down at Wreck Beach in Vancouver is one of the most beautiful sunsets, I think, in the entire city. And it was just it was the summer, and it was just one of those days with the clouds and everything, and the way the sun was setting. And then everybody was howling at the sun as it was going down.
Oh, yeah. And it's a kind of time-honored tradition.
Exactly. And there's this music playing, and we're all together, and everybody's staring at the sun. And it was just euphoric. It was incredible. And I remember thinking, I never want this moment to end. Eventually, the moment ended. And I had this recognition at that moment about life, like a profound life moment. I was like, this is like life. There's so many times where I experience tremendous beauty in a moment or a period of time, and I cling to it like it's life and death. And you know what happened after the sunset? Another incredible, beautiful moment. Because I allowed myself to adapt to it and change to it. And then we all surrounded around a bonfire, the whole beach pretty much. And that rarely happens at Wreck Beach. Usually everyone's really separate. I mean, sometimes it does, but we just, the whole beach, just everybody kind of came together because we all had this beautiful moment. But like everyone accepting and moving with it. And then when we were all there around the fire, it was dark. It was another incredible moment. And the thing is, I started to think, if I'm not so attached to the moment I'm in, every moment can keep being incredible. I think what happens for me, though, is, and I don't know if anyone else can relate to this, but when a moment doesn't feel right, or it's because I'm like not accepting it, and I'm clinging to some other idea, some other moment I had. You know, like life should always be that way.
And that's the thing. Is like, I think you said it's like it's clinging to an idea. You know, which, you know, and these beautiful moments, they occur to us in the moment when we allow ourselves to be, and then we go, oh God. I mean, it's like when we've allowed ourselves to have that level of presence and attention to something, and then we cling to it, and it's just like, and it's completely not the thing that got you there in the first place.
Right.
And I've heard it argued that you need to die to every experience that you've had before, right? Because it's only through that you can fully live now, that you can fully. So it's this constant. We actually live in this constant sort of beginning and ending thing. This life death kind of movement. Even our breath is kind of a representation of life and death. We inhale the new oxygen, we inhale that life, and we exhale what we don't need anymore. Right? It's this kind of, and it's this process. We do it every moment of our lives. We're engaged in this process of new things happening and letting things go, and things coming to an end. We do it all the time. We just don't necessarily think about it in that way because we get attached to certain things. Sometimes it's sentimental. A lot of times it's sentimental. Yeah, I think actually.
Yeah, you know, you bring up a good point. I mean, I think that really it's just like how at peace are we to the change, to the completion. I mean, you know, I think there's a certain kind of things where I think once you adapt to a completion and a new beginning in a certain area of life, it becomes almost second nature and you don't think about it anymore. Like the day ends, you go to sleep, you wake up the next morning, and then you start to get used to, I go to sleep now, I wake up now, I go to sleep now, I wake up now, and that just becomes normal, you know? And I think what ends up happening is like things don't have to be so dramatic and so precious all the time. You know, like a relationship, a friendship, it begins and then it ends. And maybe, you know, your friendship lasts until someone passes away, or maybe it lasts literally a few weeks or a few months or a few years. You know, who knows? Mm-hmm. But like, you know, I think at this point in my life, like I've learned that, you know, in my 20s, I remember just talking about friends, because I think this is an interesting kind of parallel. I remember being 20 and being like, these friends, I just envisioned us having like a friendship forever, you know, and just being there, you know. And, you know, some of the people who were there, you know, we had a good run. But some of those, like, you know, you didn't, but a lot of people who at that time, our friendship kind of came to an end. Mm-hmm. And then we kind of went different ways. And that was really hard on me at first, because I had this, and this is, I think, where the law of vision comes in. Whereas I think our vision can sometimes corrupt our ability to accept the law of completion. Mm. The law of completion sometimes literally confronts our law of vision. You know, where you have a vision of how your dream of how your life's supposed to go. And then the law of completion says, well, this happened, that's over, this isn't happening anymore.
Yes.
I mean, I had a friend, my friend George, I was 21. I was 21. He was 23, I think. We were born on the exact same day, 2 years apart. Best friends. My best friend I met in college. I get a call one day, T-boned in a car accident. Done. Over. His life's over. And I was just like, what are you talking about? Like, what? It's over? Like, it's like, I kept his number in my phone for like 3 months afterwards. And I remember being like, I'm going to call George. And I'm like, George isn't here. It was weird. Like I was in so much grief. I didn't know, but I still, even after we had done his funeral, we had buried him in a casket. I'd spoke at his funeral. I still, in many ways, had not accepted that he was gone. Mm-hmm. You know, and it was months later that I finally was like, okay, George is not here anymore. And in many ways, like, I grieve George, but George taught me so much about life, because George was, in many ways, because he passed away so young, and he and I remember us sitting by the pool, working on scripts, talking about how we were going to be in Hollywood together, making movies. And then when he passed away, that was never going to happen. But in many ways, because he passed away just before we went out and did a lot of the big stuff we were going to do, it made me really go like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go out in many ways for George and in many ways for myself. And I'm going to live the dream we talked about, because it would be a shame if I didn't follow through with this dream, you know? And I think that's part of the reason why in my 20s, I really just went for it. I just said, balls to the wall. People told me things were impossible. And I said, we're doing it. I don't fucking care. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think like the end of something can breed such amazing, incredible things. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's nothing that's ever going to bring George back in the physical world. Yeah. But in my mind, he's still present. You know what I mean? Yeah. And you mentioned this before. It's like nothing really ends, because George, I still love George. George is still in many ways a part of my life. He's always going to be a part of my life. But he's not physically going to be here. And that's okay. And I think the law of completion is like, it's not the end, but it's like that part is done. Yes. And then we can do this now, you know? Because once something's done, now there's a new doing that's available. Mm-hmm. And life goes on. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, just because someone dies doesn't mean like everything ends. People have died for fucking ever.
You know? every human being that we've ever known has died. Exactly. In the history
at this point. People might eventually figure out how to live
forever. Lots of people have done it.
Yeah.
Lots of people have done it.
I mean, if we ever figured out how to live forever, I think people would look back at this time and every time before, and they'd be like, do you remember when people used to die? That must have been, like, there would almost be, I could almost imagine a romantic, poetic part of people looking back at us, having experienced that.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I've met a woman who's on sort of a lot of the cutting edge of some of the stuff that's going on out there as far as medical sciences, but she likes to explore, well, what does that mean for us? And one of the things she explores is we are on the cusp of people who are going to be able to live potentially hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Right? In quite good health. So now it's like, but it's not just as simple as that. We go, it's like, well, do you want to? You know, it's like that song Forever Young. It's like, do you really want to live forever? Right? Is there something that that is important for you to stick around for? You know, these kinds of questions that we have. So there is an importance and there is actually, we've explored some of this idea in a weird way. Like you look at something like vampire movies, you know, especially something like, or books, something like Interview with the Vampire. This is a story about immortals, and this is often the thing when we talk about with vampires. It's a thematic element of it, which is here are these beings that are essentially immortal. Essentially, they can die, but
yeah, barring any
being murdered or they want to or they want to kill themselves or something. You know, it's they can live forever, and then there's this weird sort of price that is paid for that. You know, there's actually in the actual general mythical telling of a vampire, they aren't even human. Vampires are not human because they live forever. They have to eat from people who are human in order to survive, right? Because it's just an interesting sort of thing that we've created in our own society, because it's like, because what's at the core of it is that these are immortal beings.
Well, you know, I think, I mean, there's a whole rabbit hole with vampires.
Yeah, this is a huge rabbit hole. Maybe it's not worth diving down into.
Zombies too, but you know, whatever. But I mean, I think you're touching now on, I think, where the law of story plays into the law of completion, because story is the thing that we kind of tell around the whole thing. I mean, like, you know, here's the thing. I mean, if anything, if anyone was going to define me as anything, I'd want them to say, like, Brandon was a storyist. You know, he was a storyteller, or he was, you know, a narrator or something. You know, because to me, story is such an important part of the process. But I mean, here's the thing: I don't really think any story is real. I think it's all bullshit. They're all made up, like every story. And I'm sorry to say this, but in some ways, even the stories of the Bible. But that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter whether they happened or not. What matters is, what is the story saying? What is it communicating? Now, whether these events happened and further happened the way we think they happened, or happened the way they were communicated, is kind of irrelevant. But what matters is the thing that's behind the story. You can get all wrapped up in, like, well, this happened and that. Who gives a shit? What matters is that there's a moral, and we're trying to communicate ideas through stories, and that's how we communicate. The thing is like, the events, the content, all of that stuff, I mean, it's fun. It creates entertainment, it creates emotion, it creates, like, attachments and neat little things like that. But these don't matter. What matters is, like, look, don't kill your neighbor. Don't like look, there's value in being with yourself. Like, there's value in looking at how maybe dying could be better than living forever. Vampire story. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I think the thing is with story, it plays a great role in completion, and also story gets to end and we start a new story. Which is one of my favorite elements of story, is like, look, like, you're telling yourself, and this is, I mean, I'm doing this, you're doing this, and everyone in our audience. Right now, you're telling yourself a story. You're going, I'm this person, my life is this way, and everything means this, and blah, blah, blah. But, like, at some point, you might have a life transition, and you might go, that story doesn't make sense anymore, and I'm going to tell a new story. And you can do that.
Yeah.
That's fucking cool. The law of completion kind of lets you do that. The law of completion is like, shit, this story's bunk. The one I was telling doesn't work anymore. I'm on a new story. Or maybe that story gave me what I needed up until this point in the journey, but now it no longer serves me because it doesn't actually make sense anymore.
Yeah.
You know? And I think like the law of story is such a powerful, cool little tool. We brought it into this whole thing that we've been sharing, but everybody does it.
There's a kind of intelligence to it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like saying you know when to hang it up.
Yeah, no one. Yeah.
When no one, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to run.
Exactly.
You know, and in conclusion, saying it's like know when to fold them, know when it's done, know when your bird is cooked.
Yes.
You know, like there's so many metaphors we could take with completion. Actually, now that I'm realizing this, you know, it's like with cooking, it's like. You don't know when it's complete, then you're going to burn the food. Totally. It's going to go bad.
Yeah.
You know, like... And,
you're going to overcook. You know,
you can overcook things from your life.
Yeah.
You can overcook...
Overanalyze.
Or overanalyze. You know, it's a huge thing for us to bring into our awareness.
You know, I think what the law of completion does is we've been talking, I've been realizing... It provides relief. It lets you just kind of go like, okay, like moving on. Like how often do we sit there and stress about things? Like, you know, it's like, and also like, here's the other great thing about law of completion is like, even if you're in something and you like don't know when it's going to end, like I brought up depression a little earlier. One of the worst parts of experiencing depression for the first time, especially the first time, it's like you don't know when it's going to end. Mm-hmm. Especially when it goes on longer than you think it should. And then you're like, oh my God, like this is... What? And you're like, maybe this will never end. But here's the thing. The law of completion says that everything ends.
Yeah.
Everything in some way or another ends. Like this too shall pass is like one of the most true statements ever said. It will. Something will happen. It will turn. And the law of completion creates all sorts of relief because you can be in the middle of shit and be like, well, eventually I'll be beyond this. Eventually this will pass. And, you know, if you've never experienced like, or if you never really stopped to realize that, I mean, that saved me. In my hardest moments in life, I've been like, this sucks. This is the worst thing I've ever experienced. But I remember being like, but I know it's going to pass. And that allowed me to get through it. And I think I feel really heartbroken for people who like commit suicide and stuff like that. People who end their life or, you know, because I think what happens a lot of the time is people get caught in an infinity loop of like, this will never end. Mm-hmm. And the thing is like, everything does end. But sometimes it lasts a lot longer than you're ready for. And the law of completion doesn't always say like it will end at this time when you think it should end. It ends when it needs to end, and sometimes it's earlier than you want, and sometimes it's later than you want. Mm-hmm. But it does, but the beautiful thing is something else starts, something else begins. Yeah.
And I think you know we were at the start of before we started this, going through what kind of questions does this law ask of us, because I think all of the laws pretty much ask some questions. They all kind of challenge us in a certain kind of way to become more conscious, to become more aware. And for me, it's like this one is saying, it's like, well, what are you hanging on to? What are you hanging on to that you don't need to hang on to anymore? Yeah. You know, like that's really where a lot of the difficulty comes in for us. Right? So it's like, what are you hanging on to? What can you look at in your life and saying, like, what are you hanging on to for dear life that's maybe not so important? That's maybe a belief or a relationship or a thought, a project that's just not worth it. Yeah. It's just not who you are. What are you hanging on to right now? Because if you let it go, there is an entirely new chapter and life that's waiting for you only once you let this go.
Right. But you have to let it go.
But otherwise, yeah, it's like I guess another kind of challenge that this law gives is like, is this the ditch you're willing to die in? Is this the trench you're willing to die in?
I love that quote. That's such a good one, because that really puts things into perspective.
Yeah.
Is this the ditch you're willing to die in? And if it isn't, fucking get out of it.
Yeah.
You know? And I think everybody needs, I want to be that friend for everybody, because I think everybody needs that friend. Is this the ditch you're willing to die in? And if not, get the fuck out of it. Like, seriously, get out and go. Because, like, this is not your life. Your life does not have to be this ditch. And I'm speaking to myself, like, several years ago when I was in my lowest moment. It's like, that's not the ditch I'm going to die in. I mean, look, I walked through the valley of the shadow of death. I walked through it. I'm not fucking kidding around. I came home, I bawled my eyes out one night. I thought about walking down to the bridge and jumping off it because I didn't see a point to my life. And I couldn't understand how fucked up people can be. Mm-hmm. I was pissed off. I was angry. I was wounded. I was hurt. I was upset. And then you look at that and you go, is this the fucking ditch I'm going to die in? No way. Now I'm here today. And I would say to that person who was there then, the Brandon several years ago, and I'd say, man, you got so much fucking ahead of you. The love that you learned right now, how it matters to make a friendship. Like, fucking, you're one of my best friends. I would go across the fucking world for you. And anybody who's like that. But I went through hell to get there. Because I realized what it's like when someone will not show up for you. When you need them. When you're fucking alone. So the thing is when you're alone, that's what you're learning. Mm-hmm. You're getting that experience, which gives you empathy. But empathy isn't just for other people. It's for you. It's so you know what it feels like to fucking hurt somebody. So you know what it feels like to be alone, to hurt. Depression is like this thing we look at in society as like this fucking negative thing. And I get passionate about it because I'm like, God, like in so many ways, I wish people never had to go through it because I know how much it fucking hurts and how hard it is. At the same time, man, fuck, I get emotional about it. But I'm like, it's fucking incredible. Just hang in there, you know? Like, hang in there because you're going to come out of it. And if you just don't, like, let it crush you, you're going to be okay. But it does feel like a ditch, man. It feels like a fucking hole, and you'll never get out of it, you know? And, like, you know, I think the thing is like, reading that book, Man's Search for Meaning, like, he survived. I mean, I never dealt with anything near this on a physical level that he went through, but he dealt with a Nazi concentration camp. I mean, he dealt with Auschwitz and, like, thinking you're going to die at every fucking moment, you know? And I think about that and I go, like, I'm not going to compare suffering or anything because I think that's a silly thing to do. I think it's all relative. But reading that book really gave me some perspective on some of the suffering that I went through. Because I think what he does is he helps you take the hardship of your life and see how you're going to respond to it and see how you're going to deal with it. You know? I mean, it wasn't just that book. Like, I didn't just read that book. I mean, it takes time. And here's another awareness I had. And I think this is really important in relation to the law of completion. Things take time. Yes, everything will pass, but things take time. You cut yourself, it takes time to heal. Everything takes time. And I think the law of completion says, look, you're not going to be complete until enough time has passed for this thing to have fully healed and mended. And I think, like, the law of completion, like, sometimes we want so badly to get to the end. It's like, allow yourself to be in it right now. You know, and I think that's where, like, the law of process comes in. The healing is taking place in this time. Yes, this will end when it has healed. But, like, you know, I think of my period of depression as a time when I was healing a deep wound. And then the wound healed. And now I'm here today. And when I tell people I was depressed, most people go, you were depressed? When I tell people I was bullied, people go, you were bullied? Yes, because at a time, that was necessary. And then it passed. but it needed to be there at that time. It sucked. I'm not going to say I wanted it, but that's life. The law of completion is kind of this thing where it's like, it will end when it needs to end. And sometimes, I think what we just need to do is we need to accept that sometimes that's sooner than we like and not as soon as we like. Anyway, I went on a big speech. I get emotional about this shit, man.
That was a terrific speech. Dude, I was happy to let you speech, man.
I don't want people... I know what it's like to be at those moments. My dad went through that moment too. He lost everything. He lost his whole fortune. And I remember he said to me, fuck, what's going on here? He said to me, the only reason why I stayed alive was because of my sons. I mean, I've had so many... I've had so many challenges with my dad. My presence, my brothers, kept them going. Thing is that if someone commits suicide, they're gone. And then that person who needed you doesn't have you anymore. That's why you can never end your life. That's why you have to live. No matter how shitty it gets, you have to stay there. Stay in the game. Just don't give up. I mean, I get so emotional about it because I realize that when I had nothing to live for, I mattered to somebody else. And even if they didn't know me, if I went and did something like that, somebody in the future who I may have impacted wouldn't have me there. And I wouldn't be there. And that is necessary. And that's why suicide isn't, it's like one of those kind of things. It's the law of completion, man. Like, what are people doing when they think about jumping off a bridge or doing something like that? They're trying to end things. But we need to understand that it's not yours to end. And although you might not be able to see that in this moment, because when you're in a depressed state, at least in my experience, it's kind of all about you. When you start realizing that there's more to you than what you are experiencing, I think what happens is you start to see that you don't need to manufacture endings in that way. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing. It's going to end, but you don't need to force the ending.
You can have a different kind of ending to something.
Right.
You can look at what isn't working. You can look at what thing that has been staying alive that has overstayed its welcome.
Yeah.
And say, you know what? I'm finished with that.
Yeah.
I am finished with that thing. That is completed. That is done. And we can start anew. We can start from a new place. That is always open to us. That is always available to us. There is always a level of, we can find our dignity in any place. As you brought up Man's Search for Meaning, and that was one of my big takeaways when I read that book, was that it didn't matter if you were in a hopeless situation, a truly hopeless situation, the kind of situation where hope would kill you. Hope was the thing that destroyed people in those camps. And there were those who weren't hanging on to hope, who had said, I'm probably going to just die in here. And who said, but you know what? I can do that with as much dignity and grace and meaning as I possibly can. That's still there. That's available. I don't know exactly what this has to do with completion necessarily.
Well, I think we're kind of on the point of facing the end. Facing the end. Facing the end is a big part of this law. Facing the end makes us recognize many, many things. I mean, like, we've taken people, if anyone has listened to every episode up to this point, especially if you've done it chronologically, you've gone on a big, long journey with us. You know, and when you face the end of something, it's kind of like it takes all of this invested time, all this energy, everything, and it puts everything into perspective. And then it's like, well, if you're done the laws, what's this podcast going to be now? And I tell you, it's going to be something really cool. We have plans, but it's going to be different. It's going to evolve now because we're done this section of the podcast, and facing the end makes you kind of go into the unknown, and the unknown's scary as shit. You know, it's scary, man. I don't know if shit's scary, but whatever, it's a saying. But yeah, I mean, like, you know, like, I think what we're talking about here is we're talking about facing the end of something and the resistance to be willing to start again. But you pointed out to me, what I heard from what you said was how exciting it can be to start something new. Mm-hmm. I think we forget that when we face the end, because like usually when I start a project, it's from like a total sense of like excitement and inspiration and stuff like that. But when I'm facing the end, I'm not thinking about my excitement and inspiration for the next thing, because I'm so attached to the journey I was on that like I'm not willing to let it go yet. And so I'm not willing to get inspired and excited about my new thing yet. Yeah. You know, but then at a certain point I am, and then it's all fine. But like, I think there's this weird moment. It
can be important to honor what came before, and for some people it works to have some kind of a little ritual, like a sending off as well. That, you know, that what else are kind of, you know, celebrations of life for when someone passes, you know, like we go through a process, you know, we need, you know, it's sometimes when things come to an end, that's exactly what we need. And it doesn't have to be anything necessarily as dramatic as literal life and death. Right. You know, it can happen in smaller ways. And I remember when I went to Europe by myself when I was 20, 21, something like that. I went off to Europe. It was a dream of mine. And I decided not to go with anybody I knew. I just wanted to go and do it on my own. And it was an absolute whirlwind. I was in new places constantly. I was just like from city to city, from town to town. It was just like boom, boom, boom. It was just one adventure after the next, you know, and it was amazing. It was wild. You know, that's one of the beautiful things about travel, you know, is that you get to go and be thrown into an unknown situation, circumstance, place, and then you're moving on to the next. You kind of have to let it go, and then you can really enjoy the next place that you're in, really enjoy the next place you're in. And it was useful for me. I remember after having been to France, you know, all over France, and I was in London for a bit too, some London, all the way through France, from Paris down to the south into like Lyon and Nice, into Monaco, traveled around into Florence, and so we got into Rome, and it was probably, I don't know, this was maybe like a week and a half, 2 weeks into my travels. And this one night I just went and sat in a restaurant by myself in Rome, ordered myself like a half liter of wine. I ordered like a penne bolognese and some kind of like a roasted pork leg or something. I ordered way too much food for myself. It was stupid. But I just sat there by myself, and I just took a moment to look back at everything that had happened, and just took a moment to go, holy shit, I saw the Eiffel Tower, and I went and I saw this, and I saw that, and I experienced this, and I experienced this. Like, just took a moment to look back on it while enjoying a beautiful meal. You know, just to enjoy a beautiful meal and reflect upon it and just say, wow, I lived that. I lived all of these things. I was there. I was there, and these things occurred, and these things happened. And it was amazing. And I was getting emotional because it was a moment for me to really embrace that things that I'd actually dreamt of doing, I'd gotten to do. And then it was back out on with it, and just back on with the trip, and seeing new things again. But it's like if you can't be thinking about the last place and really enjoy the new place.
I think
take your moments.
I think you bring in, and I love that we can maybe finish on this point, is like how much the law of completion can in many ways be the law of celebration.
Yes. I love that you just brought that up,
because I don't know if we always look at completion as a celebration. I think sometimes we do, but yes. I think like every completion can be a celebration. You were there, you lived that, you made it through. Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about it was my suffering, and I think about what I went through, and I went, that was mine. I was there, I experienced that. Mm-hmm. And very few people will have experienced what I experienced the way I experienced it, and that's something to celebrate. That's something that's mine. Mm-hmm. And I think when you transform through something and you move through something, and, it really, like, this law is so interesting because it really touches on stuff like attachment and detachment and, and acceptance and process and seasons and, the whole thing about, like, just allowing life to be more of a like a step. It's a step, right? Mm-hmm. And like, I think what I think the best way to take this law, and what I'm going to take from it, this is what I'm going to take from it. But I'm looking at it and going like, what if I just celebrate anytime something's done, no matter how it works? Like, breakup, didn't work out in the relationship, celebrate it. Not because it's like, oh, I'm so glad to be done with that person, but because it's like we had some time together. Mm-hmm. And for a while it worked, and for a while it didn't. And now maybe it doesn't, it's fine. And now I'm on to the new thing. But like, I don't think we have to look back with such mourning. Mm-hmm. We don't have to look back and like really just make everything this drab ditch of a life. And I think actually where I'm going to take this further is when I'm in the ditch. My friend said this to me once, and it made, like, I was with 3 other people, and we're all having a conversation, and he steps in, and it was fucking brilliant, because we were talking about this woman. She was talking about her mom, and he said, and her mom had passed away, or no, maybe her mom hadn't passed away, but he said, she was saying something about how annoying her mom was or something, and she said, when your mom's gone, you're going to wish you had that worst moment with her just to have her back. We all just went, like, it was so emotional, man. And we were all like, oh my fucking God. Like, it was like a punch in the gut. Because you were like, the worst moment I have with this person that I love is going to be the one moment I would wish to have back when they're gone. And we might hate somebody in that moment. We might just be so angry with them. But in perspective of death, everything gets enlightened. Mm-hmm. That's why I've been kind of on this whole thing about like, when I die, like, what is this all? Mm-hmm. I have a thought I'm going to share after we share a beer, but that's this has been a great talk. It's been super emotional. But it's been good actually. I love having these discussions, man. Sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I did not expect that. But, it's actually helped me, again, even more, just seeing more, about all of this stuff in life. Mm-hmm. By the way, this is a great beer you chose. You want to introduce it to everybody?
Yeah. So this is, I just love the name.
It's so good.
It's called Galactic Space Dragon India Pale Ale from Odin Brewing Company. And Yeah,
it's a great beer, man.
It's fantastic.
It's kind of like it's interesting because it tastes really good. It's kind of like very foggy, almost like a Hefeweizen.
Yeah,
but it's smooth. It has a bit of hop to it,
as you would expect from an IPA.
Yeah,
but
it's not too hoppy.
No, it's not, because it's still actually it's very quenching.
Yeah,
in a way.
You know what I like? I mean, it sounds so pretentious to say, but like it has
like to say mouthfeel.
No, it has like a body. You know, like it has like I feel like I'm really drinking a substance. You know, like it's like you know, like it just has like a.
It's almost like a milkshake.
Yeah, it's like it's thick. You know, in a weird way, but it's good, man. Yeah. It's been going down a lot, very easy. But I've enjoyed it. So,
very good.
All right. Well, you know, we're at that point where we need to wrap things up and complete.
We are at that wrap up point and complete.
So, well, what's our final thoughts here?
Well, I love what you brought up here at the end about completion is really this thing of letting go and moving forward. Moving on is a big part of completion, and no matter what it is, it's part of these seasons and cycles and changes in our life. But what you brought up at the end there that I think is so crucial to this law is the law of completion is also saying, and celebrate it. Celebrate it. Celebrate all of the stuff that happened before. Take a moment to really appreciate. And we didn't even get into how the law of appreciation relates to this one, but
I think people can go back to it, and and if they take this episode from that, they're gonna see.
Absolutely, like to take a moment to appreciate and celebrate everything that had come before, the whole part of the journey before sending it off. There was something really wonderful about that, and what you were saying as well, that story that you had shared about what your friend had said to your group reminds me of something that Frederick Buechner, who had said, which is like, on final examination, all moments are key moments, and life itself is grace.
Oh, I love it.
You know, it's just like when we look back on certain things, and sometimes things look challenging and difficult, and letting go is not always an easy process, but very often we can look back on it, and especially from a point of celebration. I think that's actually a really crucial component of all of this, of this completion process, is the celebration of it. You know, it's an honoring of what we've done, where we've come from, what we've been through, and letting it go. So that's it.
That's great, man. This celebration thing, I think, that to me is something I'm going to kind of take forward myself, and I'm going to incorporate into my life a little bit more, because I think it helps transition through endings, but it also helps transition through middles. Because I think when you're in the shit of it, it's like you can kind of see the celebration of like, well, this is going to be over one day. And like even that saying, like the worst moment with your mother, when she's gone, you're going to wish for that moment back, just to have her back. I mean, in your own life, that's true too. The worst moment, like when you're facing death, I think if you can get to the point where you can see grace in your worst moment, I mean, I think you've really moved mountains, Okay, here's the thing I want to share with people just for the end of it. And this is an exercise I've been doing because it's really helped me, especially with this law, now that I realize it. But is give yourself, and that's what I did for me. I'm just going to say, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to say what I did. I gave myself 1 year to live. I said, if this is it, if this is my last year of life, I have 365 days from today to live. What would I do? What would be important to me? What would matter? And I found this to be a really effective timeline. It might work better, you can change it around for yourself, but I found a year to be very effective for me, because when I think in 5 years or 10 years, it's too long. There's not enough there's not enough need to like really do something right now.
Kind of urgency.
Yeah. But when I think about a day or a week or a month, it's too soon. It's like all I want to do is just kind of do something comfortable and easy, and I don't care about my health as much. Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, if I'm honest with myself, if I only have a month to live, I'm not spending time working out.
Yeah.
I can tell you that. But you know what I mean? Like if it's a year, working out still kind of makes a little bit of sense, because I'm going to have some energy so I can do some of the things I want.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But 10 years, it's kind of like, I don't even know. Like, it's hard for me to even conceptualize after all this stuff and all the life I've experienced already. I mean, 10 years is like so much stuff can happen. But a year kind of gave me a good perspective, because what it did was it helped me see like, well, what's actually really important in a year and what isn't. And I just decided anything that isn't really important in this year gets no focus anymore. I'm putting that to the side. It can be done and dealt with later or discarded entirely. I don't give a shit. But whatever is pressing, if I had to do this year, this is going to be my thing. And what I started doing was I started looking at where I'm going to travel. I started looking at like what, who I want to go with, who I want to hang out with, what I want to build, what I want to do in this year. And it was long enough to kind of make something substantial, but short enough to make it pressing and demanding. And also short enough so that I didn't get so in my head about how I had to be or what I had to become or what the thing I was building, what it needed to be. Because here's the thing. Even if I made a movie, I wouldn't see the movie get released, so it doesn't matter. So, but maybe I still want to make the movie, but not to see it get released, but because I want to make this movie.
Right.
Like I think about like someone like Heath Ledger or someone like that, or James Dean, who died before their movies were actually released. Mm-hmm. And I think like they never saw the impact they made. But I don't think that should matter, at least for me at this juncture in my life. So that's what I'd say for people. Give yourself a year and see what your priorities would be. I think there's some interesting data there.
I'm going to go through that myself.
Yeah, try it out.
I think.
It's it's not about getting all caught up in the death thing. It's about seeing how this enriches your life.
Seeing what has meaning.
Yeah. What actually matters.
What really matters to you.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's what I discovered. I realized I was focused on a lot of things that didn't really actually matter to me. And that was a big slap in the face, because I was like, what? Oh, I thought that mattered, and it actually doesn't. That was a great perspective shift.
Fantastic. Thanks for listening to the show. If you got something out of this, if you feel it improved your life or your journey in any way, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share the episode. You can also support us on Patreon, where we have tons of great bonuses. You are the ones that make the show possible and help us to thrive. Thank you for joining us.